Access granted.
Good morning one and all to the Imperium video log. We're now, as you are fully aware, moving on to the deeper dive into what we call the Encyclopedia Enpyraen, which is quite, I suppose, covered in an overview on the main Imperium website. But I'd like to, obviously start this by taking a deeper dive. Now, obviously, this is something new for you guys. You no longer have to stare at me during the whole conversation, and I apologise for anyone who misses that. But as you can tell, I'm still here. But I did want to take a break from the sort of writing art side of things and actually focus more on the book itself, because that's what we're really here for, isn't it? And this week we're just going to start with a brief overview of the 6 main factions of the Imperium. As you know, factions are useful, having different sides, as it were, different armies, different motivations, protagonists, antagonists, assistants, and so forth are always quite useful to have. And I feel it's quite vital that in the Imperium we make clear boundaries, as it were, though as you will find going through this, such boundaries don't actually exist. We actually have, as you're probably aware, 6 of them, and they do actually cross over in their motivations, their beliefs, their ideology fairly often. And I hope I've managed to, in some degree, have quite a strongly rooted ideology for each of the 6. Well, strong ideology and identity for each of the 6 excuse me, different factions in here. So first of all, we're obviously going to touch on the Imperium themselves, the rising star, as it were, even though they have been around for something in the region of about 3,000 of our years. Those who've been following along know that the whole idea of the Imperium is founded on the fact that Alexander, during his conquest, did not have it abruptly terminated in Babylon in 323 AD, our time. He was in fact saved by what may have been typhoid fever or something else, nominally by Sham, but Sham is the only one who knows it wasn't him that did it. The person who did it is as much a mystery to him as to the people who never saw that person. This caused Alexander to be able to not only conquer as far east as the South China Sea and then continue back all the way to the west coast of Ireland, but have the means with which to actually hold that empire. Because the one thing that had always crossed my mind, that had always made me wonder, looking at other empires, looking at other dynasties and so forth, is that the larger the empire is, the much harder it is for one person, even one person of great vision, of great ambition and great focus, to hold that empire together once the war part is over. Once obviously the armies leave or life returns to normal, people will eventually grow, shall we say, contentious about some little foreigner coming in and taking over their country. Now, obviously Alexander had the right idea from the beginning, that he actually had the great belief of maintaining the old order that existed prior to his arrival. After his conquest, he left officials who were not corrupt and cruel to their people in their places. He left religions untouched. He didn't destroy any monuments to the former occupants of his post. All he asked for was that the people in charge were loyal to him, and that was it. The people themselves, the everyday man and woman on the street were left alone to live their lives as it was. They could pick up bits of his culture as he picked up bits of theirs if they so wished, but there was no obligation to do so. There was no obligation to worship his gods. There was no obligation to even speak his language. He learned and drew some anger from his lieutenants and his generals during the conquest in Persia from adopting certain Persian culture, certain Persian cultural points and identifications. But what interested me about Alexander was the fact that he was quite visionary for his time. He wasn't jingoistic in that sort of way. He was very open to learning. He was I suppose you could say, not only was he quite a brutal, vicious and violent man, because obviously in order to be who he was he had to be, but he seemed to be someone who had a great thirst for learning and knowledge and experience, which is something I found fascinating, the character from the beginning. And even as you're seeing the artwork of him that you'll see during this slideshow, I tried to capture that, the different influences, the different styles. His pose is one of someone who is relaxed, who is thinking, who is musing, even though he's dressed in very heavy decorative armour. It's hands behind the back, quite relaxed, eyes off in the distance, thinking about something, even though he's a ruler of the known world. Now obviously we have the Kaushadar here, and also the Dracograth, who were the initial means for which to achieve what Alexander would later call the bloodless conquest. Now obviously there is a comparison being made here to nuclear and biological weapons, the whole idea of the ultimate deterrent, in this case having the ancient world mythical fantasy equivalent in the form of the Kaushadar. Now just to think about, you have to imagine if you were, let's say, a plains person, or living on a plain, living in a small town in the village, if you actually saw a black wall of even 1,000 fully armed, fully armoured, fully equipped Kaushadar just casually marching, not showing any threat, not drawing any weapons, towards your city, towards your band, towards your town, towards your army. If you look back in that time, armour was still a relatively new thing. People carried shields to some degree if they could afford them. They wore whichever armour they could afford, and even the richest only had torso armour, which wasn't always metal, and armour on their forearms and their calves and legs, an armoured skirt or kilt with teruges on it, and possibly a helmet of some description. If you imagine someone who is enclosed completely in metal, from the crest to the top of their head to the bottom of their boots, in heavy armour, with a heavy shield and with some pretty darn impressive looking weapons, immediately the first thing you're going to do is lose your motivation to fight that person, especially if that person is close to 9 feet tall. As I used the illusion in the books, in the short stories and the collections and the origin stories, I suppose you could call them, people saw them as sort of automata made by Hephaestion, or Hephaestion, the Greek god of the forge and of devices and invention and all that sort of thing, of artifice, I suppose, and immediately threw down their weapons and surrendered, because you don't want to fight something like that. I certainly wouldn't. If I saw even if they weren't in armour, they seemed quite significantly beyond human capability. And of course, one thing I had to think of as well was the whole thing with Alexander's leaving, what would happen. And of course, in order to have, you've got 10,000 Kalshadar, you've got 300 Dracograth. You can spread them out, but we're talking about an empire which goes from what would be southern Korea of our times, Vietnam, Cambodia sort of area, all the way across to the west coast of Ireland. Now, I haven't measured that distance, but it's rather considerable. And we're talking about the whole Russian steppes, known as Scythia in those days, the diverse cultures of Africa, of India, of the Middle East, of everything, of Afghanistan, which is just as it's often been described, it's the murder of empires, or the death of empires. So, not only do we need our ultimate deterrent Kalshadar and Dracograth, who are always there as a threat, we need regular army, we need regular troops, we need a police force, we need courts and their support and everything like that. Now obviously the Imperium has a senate. The Imperium also has its everyday army troops. The hoplites, as they are mentioned, are regular people who are given decent enough equipment to do their job. And then we have, as you see, also the Epibatoi, who are the elite shipboard guardians, fully armoured, fully vacuum suited, and designed to do their job. Now next, without really going into without really moving off too far, we actually have the other human side of things now. As you may see through reading the books, the Imperium itself is kind of culturally diverse. We have people from all different nations under one banner, as it were, and we also have people of different species. We have the dwarves, we have the goblins, who are kind of alluded to and not mentioned too much, but they're going to have a bit more dominance later on. They'll have their day in the sun. We also have other species and races that may show up later. We may get into that, but basically Imperium is all of humanity from east to west of the big Eurasian, Africa, India continent, as it were, that huge landmass, though the Americas and places like that have not been touched. Now, the Panastas, the resistance movement, as it were, are a little different. They have had some presence in what are known as the outside territories, the other countries. Now, the next episode I'm going to cover geography a little bit more in the Imperium, because I think that's important. But everything from North and South America, Australia, Greenland, and the islands in that sort of, the Northern Islands, the Arctic and the Antarctic, many of the Pacific, Caribbean, and Atlantic islands are all not officially part of the Imperium. They never joined. Japan never joined. But they have a relationship with it. And obviously, as you're seeing, in the Panastas, people are coming from all over to be part of the Panastas, because they're seeing that Apatyon, the person who they were formed to resist, is possibly a threat to everybody. His aspirations are not going to die any more than he is, because, as you know, Apatyon is a trinity, and he's got all the time in the world to achieve what he wants to achieve. Now, the Panastas again are quite a diverse grouping, but the only thing that is necessary to be a member is to want to overthrow the totalitarian government of the Union. It was formed by Unity, a very mysterious character who nobody really seems to know the origins to. She appeared, she had some prophetic weight behind her about leading humanity from bondage and so forth. She appears to be ageless. She may be a trinity, she may not. Nobody really knows for sure, not even Sham knows, and even Sham is not frightened of her, but edgy in her presence. And then we have Gabriel. Gabriel doesn't even know. And Gabriel is the person who knows more of her than anybody else, and is still in mourning for her loss many, many years ago. Panastas, when they are introduced, appear to be a solely mortal human organisation. We have the Kal-Shadar of the Imperium, who seem to be made up predominantly of immortals. Excuse me. We have the original Panastas that was formed by the immortal Trinity of Trinity, being Unity, Gabriel and Sham. We have the Union, which also appears to be somewhat have immortals in it a lot. But we have the Panastas, which is a purely human organisation. And it's an organisation in such a way that it isn't really an organisation. They have some sort of military bearing. You see people like Commander Sung, who definitely has a military bearing about him. He is an ex-Union military soldier, fairly high ranking. But overall, the Panastas themselves are just a ragtag rebellious movement trying to survive and trying to see if they can win, which makes them rather interesting, I think you'll find. Next, we move on to the Pilots College. Now, the Pilots College, they're the newest faction, and they were always there in the short story The Seeker, in the Wandering Wanderer collection number 1. I did make allusions to the pilot, but he was kind of an embryonic being. I was playing with something, and the Pilots College and the pilots themselves have evolved. Now, I know a lot of series have had some sort of odd, esoteric, strangely mysterious navigator type people. We've had June. We started it with that big, gosh awful, pink, massive headed, flipping, swimming monstrosity floating around in orange gas and spurting planets from his mouth, apparently. And of course, we have the navigators in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, which is kind of interesting, of some sort of not necessarily psychic freak, but an anomaly in the human condition. And I wanted to create something of a mystery as well, because the whole idea, the whole source of technology in the Imperium is itself a mystery. Ancient, long-dead alien civilization just left everything behind for the human race just because they felt that was a good idea. Now, the thing is, somebody has to know more about that than somebody else. It stands to reason, doesn't it? That's the Pilots College. The Pilots College essentially appear to know something nobody else does. They appear to have a better understanding of what is called void space, that medium through which the network of void gates, funnily enough, which the Imperium uses for long distance travel, apparently exclusively. Travel is, they call that the Alchera Ungod, which is the realm of chaos, essentially. And they variously describe it as the direct reflection of our reality, or the constantly changing, shifting, flowing, plastic, elastic realm where everything is possible. And that's why I decided in the artwork to represent it as made up of facets and fragments of ever-shifting glass. I even played with the image that it depends which way you look at it. If you look at it with a head to the left, it appears as a wall on the left. Head to the right, there's a wall on the right, and the whole orientation changes. I wanted to make it confusing, and I wanted to add that mystery, and that is the role the Pilots College is going to fulfill in the Imperium universe. Now, of course, you can't have a good book series, especially sci-fi space opera, without an antagonist or two. Now, the first of these antagoni is, of course, the Union. Now, the Union, in some ways, are what you would essentially call your standard, your some way cliched, and in some ways typical, but not always. There's going to be more to them, don't you worry. Authoritarian regime trying to take over the world, in it with their own form of very strict, very twisted, very religious, very conservative values, which I'm sure is going to offend a few people out there. I've spent enough time on Twitter to know that it's pretty much impossible to avoid offending people. I'm always going to offend somebody, so what the hell, if you're offended, I don't care. But anyway, moving on, we do have the Union, which is run by the man who is known as High Prefect Apatheon, the Keeper of the Word, the Keeper of the Way, the Shepherd, whatever you want to call him. And you see, he's a rather strange looking chap. He has there on his belt the Way, what is supposedly the original copy of the Way of the Christoman, which in hegemony speech, as it is variously seen, is the name given to Jesus of Nazareth, who in the hegemony universe did exist, but wasn't quite how he was represented in our world. It was kind of a purer, perhaps more Eastern philosophy that he preached, and he did have an effect on many of the major characters. Nashar was a friend of his, Alexander was a good friend of his, he was well known. But he also had something a little different about him, that magic, shall we say, or that ineffable other. And I wanted to leave that in there, but obviously Apatheon is looking at the way to control people version of this religion. And he's created quite a totalitarian, intolerant, somewhat, shall we say, jingoistic, racist, bigoted society. Yeah, your typical authoritarian, want to throw them down kind of regime that you see in a lot of young adult and new adult fiction, which is very popular at the moment. Don't worry, I'm not going to have some child who is roundly disliked for being both ugly and untalented and completely ignored by everyone suddenly turn into the salvation of the world. Alexander and his Kalshadar are already on their way. So we may have some heroic elements here or there from the younger members of the Imperium, but I'm going to keep quiet on that. But don't worry, it's not going that way. For those hardcore sci-fi fans, I'm not going to take it in that direction. But like I said, you can actually see it as a totalitarian society with quite religiously themed elements around them. It's a police state, it is a state under martial rule, and it is a state which is also, despite having many religious doctrines against science, not shy about using them. There's a whole Project Prometheus and the Promethean Company, who are essentially the Union's own attempt at creating Kalshadar, because they've faced the Kalshadar. Apatheon himself is aware that they exist. He spent much of his time in the Council learning about them. As you know, the Council predated the Union. He was part of the Council and later ousted control of the Council from Sham and formed his own union, deciding his ambition deserved more than that. But as I was saying, the Promethean Company is effectively their attempt at stealing the secrets of the Kalshadar using genetic manipulation and so forth. And they have had some degree of success in P Company, the Prometheus Company. Irony intended. Stealing fire from the gods, so on and so forth. But as you can see here, they're quite advanced, quite skilled. They're still mostly human size. They're not as big and bulky as the Kalshadar, and they have, shall we say, not quite equivalent armour and weapons. They are a problem to the Kalshadar, and you'll see that. Now, speaking of problems for the Kalshadar, and problems for everyone in general, we move on to our next faction, the Gorkai. Now yes, I hear you cry, they are green, they are big and they are violent. They are orcs, are they not? Maybe, maybe not. I did want to have a few other alien out there races, other races, people completely exterior who can be expanding out into our galaxy without running across one or two. And I may introduce other alien races later if they're relevant, but only if they're relevant. I'm not going to go full Stargate and have a universe filled with 100 billion different races that get a 5-minute appearance in an episode, or they get one episode to themselves. The Gorkai are interesting in the fact that they are almost on a par with Kal Shadar, not only in size and strength, but also in their discipline, their sophistication and their technology. Gorkai are not stupid orcs, not violent, hit everything with something sharp until it stops moving kind of beings. They're actually, as you can see in the art, representing somewhat sophisticated. They have very advanced armour, they have what looks like advanced weapons, and they appear to be using military tactics. You can see in the artwork showing the raid of the Gorkai, they're divided, and they're brutally, viciously efficient, as you see the damage one Gorkai has done inside of this Union freighter. But then they're piratical in nature, they're pirates, they have loyalty to no one, they follow their own agenda. We just don't know what that agenda is yet, but they're going to play an interesting role in the series as it develops. Now the final thing we're moving on to is, as far as factions are concerned, is the very final faction, that of them, they, other. Now, these are going to be somewhat, as you may have seen from introductions, the primary antagonists in this series. But the thing is, pitifully little is known about them. It's known that they exist, it is assumed that they are some sort of organised group, because several incidents have occurred which show hallmarks of their presence, which seem to show organisation. But no one really knows what they look like. No one knows where they're from, what they want, who they are, if they're human or not, where they're from. They just know that they exist. Now, on each world where they have committed their atrocities, their desecrations, their absolutely horrendous acts, they always leave one witness behind. One witness who's always found at the base of this crystalline tree. Thank you, Dan Simmons, for the idea, by the way. An organic construct which appears to feed both off of the negative emotions of the people upon it and the air, the atmosphere which they cause by their base debaucheries, but also off of the life force, perhaps even the blood excuse me, of those who are actually impaled upon it. And these are left around, appear to grow themselves, as I said, resonant with the negative energy. Those who have seen some of my other art may realise there's somewhere these are present and appear not to belong. Pay attention to that. But, as I was saying, these trees, these structures, appear to be somewhat psychically resonant and grow in the presence of these highly negative emotions. So they may come from these beings known as them, or they may just be something that follows behind, something that is perhaps indirectly symbiotic with them. Now, of course, as I said, they leave one witness behind. That person, after having seen what they did to his family, his friends, everyone he ever knew, is not going to be in the best state of mind that a human being could be in. At least not one where she could describe the perpetrators in anything that one would consider a coherent fashion. So little is known about them, and I've done that quite intentionally, because I think in a way you kind of remove the terror, the horror, the fear of a dangerous force if you go into too many details about who they are, about their motivations. I think something like a sort of formless horror, a formless, dangerous force which is coming towards you, is a lot more frightening if you haven't got the faintest clue exactly who it is you're facing. You can't visualize them, you can't see their motivations, you can't plan. If you can't get inside their head, you can't figure out how to stop them. And I liked that idea for the antagonist in the Imperium series, that there is basically a mass coming towards them, so they believe, but they don't know what it is. They've got some ideas, they've got some clues. Alexander found out some stuff during his long absence in the catacombs under the Red Desert on that strange planet. Others have seen little clues along the way, but no one knows for sure. Even the Gorkai will run like hell if what they identify as a ship occupied by them is anywhere near. One little clue was that Calyadi's ship was boarded by Ghorkai. Lupanike's ship was nearby and was boarded by them. As soon as they started boarding Lupanike's ship, the orcs ran like hell away from Calyadi's ship. They didn't even put up a fight, and they probably could put up a decent fight, but something about their attitude said they couldn't win. And that was interesting for somewhat what you would consider a race of giant green technologically advanced Spartans. But there you go. But there you are. That is a quick run over, a quick insight, some ideas ripped out of my head about the main factions of the Imperium universe. I hope you've enjoyed it. We're going to be presenting more videos in this format, digging deeper and deeper and deeper into the whole lore and mythos and structure of the Imperium. I'm telling you, there's a lot more, and though these aren't essential before the books come out, they might be handy to give you some ideas. But I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you'll continue to watch them, and I hope you enjoy the new format. Please, comments, mentions, whatever you like, let me know what you think. But it's been a pleasure. Signing out as always, Alan J. Fisher. You have a great rest of your day.